Send the money, Dad. You don't need to come. That was the whole message. 11 words. No please, no love you. Just a Venmo request for $4,000 and 11 words that told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in my own daughter's life. I sat in my truck for a long time after I read that. The engine was still running. The radio was playing something country, something about coming home. And I remember thinking I'd been coming home my whole life. 41 years of coming home. And apparently that was the embarrassing part. My name is not important. What I am is a father, 63 years old, retired union electrician out of Columbus, Ohio. I've got hands that look like a relief map of the Appalachians. Every crack and callus earned. I drove a work van for 34 years. Got up at 4:30 in the morning more times than I can count. Ate lunch in parking lots, in warehouses, on the tailgates of trucks. Missed exactly 2 of my daughter's birthday parties her whole childhood. Once for a mandatory overtime call on a hospital job. Once because I was in the ER getting 8 stitches in my forearm from a conduit edge. I sent her flowers both times. She was 4 and 7. She doesn't remember either. Her name is Bryn. She is 31 years old, and she is beautiful, and she is brilliant, and somewhere between her college graduation and her wedding planning, she became someone I no longer fully recognize. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it the way you say it when it's just true. The way the doctor says it when he reads you the chart. Here is what the numbers show. Her mother and I divorced when Bryn was 12. It wasn't ugly, as divorces go. We were just 2 people who had grown into different shapes and couldn't find a comfortable way to share the same space anymore. I kept the house in Westerville. Her mother moved to Scottsdale. Bryn stayed with me during the school year, her mother in summers. I coached her soccer team for 3 years. I drove her to violin lessons every Thursday for 4 years, even though I worked long days and the lesson was at 6, and traffic on 270 was a nightmare. I sat in that little waiting room with the fake ficus plant and the water-stained ceiling tiles, and I didn't complain once, because the look on her face when she played something she'd finally gotten right, that was worth every red light. I paid for college, all 4 years of it. Ohio State, which she got into on her own merit. I want to be clear about that. The girl is sharp, always was. But I paid the tuition, the room and board, the books, the meal plan, the study abroad semester in Florence. I paid for the Florence semester twice, actually. Once in money. Once in the 3 months of worrying that I did quietly, by myself, in the house that felt too big once she was gone. She met her fiancé at a firm where she started working after her MBA. His name is Tanner. His family is from Greenwich, Connecticut. His father sits on 2 corporate boards and owns a place on the Cape. I don't hold any of that against Tanner. He's polite enough, shakes my hand, looks me in the eye, says sir. But there's a distance in him when he looks at me, like he's calculating something. Things started to change. The first Christmas after they got engaged. Small things. The kind you notice but talk yourself out of. She didn't come home for Christmas Eve. They went to his family's place in Connecticut instead. She called me Christmas morning. Brief, cheerful in the way that people are cheerful when they want to seem fine. I said I understood. I did understand. Then she stopped calling first. Then the calls got shorter. Then there was a birthday dinner, her idea, I thought, where she brought Tanner and his sister's husband, and we went to a nice restaurant downtown, and Bryn laughed the loudest at something Tanner's sister said. A laugh I hadn't heard before. A performance of a laugh. And when I told a story about a job I'd done at the new stadium construction, something funny that had actually happened, she smiled the way you smile at a child who has said something sweet but slightly embarrassing. I noticed. I filed it away. I kept showing up. When they announced the engagement officially, there was an announcement, a photographer, a party at Tanner's parents' estate in Connecticut that I drove 11 hours to attend. Bryn told me the wedding would be here in Columbus. She wanted the venue she'd loved since she was a little girl. The Seattle Club downtown. Elegant ballroom, river view, the whole thing. I was glad. I offered to pay. I meant it completely, no hesitation. She was my daughter, and this was her wedding, and I had saved for exactly this kind of moment for over a decade. The venue deposit alone was $18,000. I wrote the check, then the catering contract, $22,000. I wrote that check too. Floral arrangements, photographer, rehearsal dinner venue, out-of-town guest accommodations at a block of rooms I reserved at the Hilton on Nationwide. I handled all of it. $73,000 total, across about 4 months. I did not say this to anyone. I did not remind Bryn. I didn't want credit. I just wanted her to have the day she'd imagined. 3 weeks before the wedding, she called me, not to talk, to instruct. She said, "Dad, I need to talk to you about the reception seating. Tanner's family is very particular about optics. Some of his dad's colleagues are going to be there, and, I just think it would be better if you sat at table 12, near the back. That way you're comfortable and you don't have to make small talk with people you don't know." Table 12. I knew the layout. I'd seen the seating chart. Table 12 was against the wall by the service corridor next to the coat check. It was where they were putting distant acquaintances and a few elderly relatives who needed to leave early. I said, "Okay, because what else do you say?" The next call came 4 days later. She wanted me to arrive after the cocktail hour, just for the dinner and ceremony. She said, "I just think it'll flow better." She said, "You know how you can be at big social things." I did not know how I could be at big social things. I did not know how I could be at big social things. I had spent 34 years being professional in rooms full of strangers. But I said, "Okay." The call after that was the one I will not forget for as long as I am alive. She needed me to transfer money for a last-minute addition, a photo booth company, $1,600, and when I said I'd handle it but asked if we could just talk for a minute, if we could have dinner before the wedding, just the two of us the way we used to, she sighed. It was a short sigh, impatient, and she said, "Dad, I love you, but honestly, this wedding is about starting a new chapter, and your life, the trucks, the blue-collar thing, it's just not the image we're going for. I need you to understand that. Just be there, be quiet, and write the checks. That's honestly the most helpful thing you can do. Your whole life, just not the image we're going for." I was standing in my kitchen when she said it. I had a cup of coffee in my hand. I set it down very carefully on the counter. I remember that specifically, how carefully I set it down. Like if I moved too fast, something inside me might spill that I couldn't get back. I said, "I understand." And I hung up. I stood in that kitchen for a while. I thought about the Thursday violin lessons. I thought about the Florence semester. I thought about the ER with the 8 stitches and the flowers I sent a 7-year-old so she wouldn't feel forgotten. I thought about the $73,000. I thought about the look on her face at that birthday dinner, the performance of a laugh, and then I picked up my phone and I called my attorney. Not to do anything rash. I want to be clear about that. I am not a rash man. I called him the way I call anyone when I need to understand what my actual options are. Because in my experience, when something important is happening, the first step is to know exactly what you're working with. We talked for an hour. He walked me through everything clearly. Then I made 3 more calls. I called the Sea Auto Club. I spoke with the events coordinator, a woman named Deborah who had been nothing but professional for the whole planning process. I told her I needed to cancel my payment authorization for the venue, that going forward, any remaining balances or day of charges should be directed to the bride and groom, and that I was withdrawing as the guarantor on the account. She was quiet for a moment. She said she understood and that she would send written confirmation. I called the catering company. Same conversation. Remaining balance responsibility transferred to the couple. I called the florist. Then I called the Hilton and released the room block I'd been holding for out-of-town guests. 14 rooms, prepay for 2 nights each. They refunded me to my card on file. I did not call Bryn. I did not send a message. I did not explain. I went to sleep that night better than I had in months. The calls started 8 days before the wedding. First from Brynine, confused, her voice high and tight in a way I recognized from when she was a teenager and had gotten caught in something. She said there must have been a mistake, that the venue was saying the account was no longer guaranteed, that the caterer was asking for the remaining 30% up front. I let her talk. When she was done, I said, "No mistake, I withdrew as guarantor. You and Tanner will need to handle the remaining payments." She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, "Dad, the wedding is in 8 days. "I know," I said. "We don't. Tanner's family isn't going to. This is not. Why would you do this?" I said, "You told me my life was not the image you were going for. I'm just making sure my money isn't either." She hung up. Tanner called me that evening. He was measured, controlled, clearly had rehearsed something. He said he respected me and that there had been a miscommunication and that Bryn sometimes said things she didn't mean when she was stressed. I said I appreciated that. I said I believed him that she was stressed. I also said that I had written down the exact words she had used, with the date and time, and that I did not believe stress had put them there. He asked what it would take. I said, nothing. I'm not negotiating. I'm not punishing anyone. I simply decided that $73,000 is a reasonable stopping point for funding an event I'd been told I'm an embarrassment at. He was quiet. I said, I'll still come to the wedding if she wants me there, as her father, not as the checkbook. His family, as it turned out, stepped in. They covered the venue and catering. I heard this through Bryn's mother, who called me furious, then called me back 3 days later, quiet and thoughtful. She said, I think I understand what you did. I did not go into detail. I just said that I hoped Bryn had a beautiful day. I went to the wedding. I wore the suit I wore to my own father's funeral, which was the best suit I owned. I got a haircut. I shined my shoes with the same tin of polish I've had since 1987. I drove myself. I arrived on time. Not early, not after the cocktail hour. On time. I sat where I was told, table 12 against the wall. I didn't complain. I watched my daughter walk down the aisle on the arm of her uncle because she had not asked me to walk her. She was stunning. White dress, flowers in her hair, the look on her face that said she knew exactly how beautiful she was. I felt something in my chest that I think is just what love looks like when it has gotten old and complicated and a little bit bruised around the edges. Still love. Just older. During the reception, Tanner's father found his way to table 12. He was a trim man in his 60s, good suit, firm handshake, the kind of confidence that comes from never having worried about much. He sat down next to me without being invited, and he said, I heard what happened. I didn't say anything. He said, I have a son. He went through a phase. He was quiet for a moment. You made the right call. That was all he said. He shook my hand again and went back to his table. Later in the evening, Bryn found me. It was after the cake, during the dancing. She came to table 12. She sat down. She didn't say anything right away. She looked out at the room, the flowers, the lights, the people, and she looked like she was doing math in her head, adding things up she hadn't thought to count before. She said, I didn't think you'd come. I said, I'm your father. This is your wedding day. Of course I came. She looked at me and her eyes were wet and she said, I said something terrible to you. I said, yes, you did. She didn't try to explain it or walk it back. I respected that. She just said, I don't know when I started thinking like that. I don't know when I started sounding like that. I thought about a lot of things I could say. I thought about the violin lessons, the Florence semester, the stitches, the parking lots and the packed lunches and the 4:30 mornings. I thought about all the things I had never once said out loud because that's not what you do. You don't hand your kids a bill. You don't trade in the sacrifices. I said, you're 31. You've got time to figure out who you want to be. She put her head on my shoulder the way she used to when she was 8, and we were watching movies on the couch, and she was almost asleep. Just for a moment. Then she straightened up. She said, can I call you next week, just to talk? I said, I'll answer. She went back to the dance floor. I watched her for a while, her laughing, really laughing this time, with her husband, with her friends, light on her feet, young and alive, and full of whatever her life was going to be. Then I picked up my glass, finished what was in it, and drove myself home. I didn't need a speech. I didn't need a scene. I didn't need anyone at that wedding to know what had happened between us, or what I had paid for, or what I had walked away from paying for, or what it had cost me, in a way that has nothing to do with money. I just needed her to know, and she knew. Some things you spend 40 years building. You don't always get to choose how long it takes the other person to see it, but you can choose whether you keep showing up while they figure it out. I chose to show up. I just stopped pretending the showing up was invisible. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not the phone call, not the wedding, not even what Bryn said to me that afternoon in 11 words that rewrote something between us. The moment I keep coming back to is the coffee cup. The way I set it down on that counter, carefully, like I was buying myself one extra second to decide what kind of man I was going to be about this. I've thought a lot about what made me do what I did. Not the anger, because I wasn't angry. Not exactly. It was something quieter than anger. It was clarity. And I think clarity only comes to you when you've spent a long time being honest with yourself about what you actually value and why. That's not something you can fake or rush. It takes years of showing up. To jobs, to people, to yourself. Before you trust your own read on a situation. What Bryn did wasn't malicious. That's the thing I had to sit with. She didn't wake up one morning and decide to be cruel. She drifted, slowly, over years, in the direction of whatever she thought she was supposed to want, whoever she thought she was supposed to be. And somewhere in that drift, she lost her bearings on what was real and what was just borrowed. That happens to people. It happened to me at 25 in a different way. The difference is whether someone in your life loves you enough to let you feel the weight of what you've dropped. I loved her enough for that. What I did took a kind of moral courage that I don't say lightly, because it wasn't easy and it wasn't clean. And there were 3 days in there where I wondered if I was just a stubborn old man who couldn't let go of being hurt. But I kept coming back to this. There is a difference between love that protects someone from consequences and love that holds steady while consequences do their work. I knew which one I was offering. I chose it deliberately. The intelligence of it, and I mean the clear-eyed, practical kind of intelligence, not cleverness, was in knowing what I was actually doing and what I was not. I wasn't trying to humiliate her. I wasn't trying to blow up her wedding. I was removing my financial guarantee from an event I had been told I was an embarrassment at. That's not revenge. That's just a man being consistent between what he believes and what he funds. And the part that required everything I had, the part that required every callus and every 4:30 morning and every parking lot lunch to have built something in me that didn't break, was showing up anyway. Suit pressed. Shoes shined. Table 12. On time. Because the point was never the money. The point was that I was still her father when the money was gone. Bryn put her head on my shoulder at that reception for about 4 seconds. That was enough. Not because it was forgiveness. We've got a longer road ahead of us than 4 seconds. But because she remembered. She knew who had shown up. She knew what it meant that I had. What you build in a person over 30 years, the quiet faithfulness of it, the unglamorous daily work of it that doesn't disappear when they drift. It waits. And when they find their way back toward it, they recognize it. Because it was always real. That's the only inheritance I've ever had to give.